As for how the election, it was manifestly rigged. I don't know about all the dead voters and the illegal aliens.
Just in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm a lib.
One of the leaders of the student movement who says that we need a long march through the institutions. What Mao did in China, we have to have for America.
Do you actually believe any of the stuff you're saying?
I'm glad I persuaded you that I'm not just a total liar.
What is your opinion on the recent departure and statements of Candace Owens?
If I feared that Candace were, going to be silenced or something like that.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to be reviewing the best moments from a recent Q&A with Smooth Mickey, Michael Knowles, aka the Sicilian Dream, Silk Road, cigar-wielding merchant, or whatever else you'd like to call him. This one's just come out, guys, and it's a fascinating one. They go into election fraud. They go into the true essence of liberal politics, which I'll get into. He gets confronted by a smug Brit, and then also he gets confronted about his opinions on the recent Candace Owens drama. So, you guys are going to enjoy this one. Let's get into it.
Do you believe that the 2020 presidential election was directly stolen in the sense that there were enough illegal immigrants and dead people voting to swing the election to Joe Biden, despite the 60-plus court cases that Trump lost, including by justices appointed to him? And if so, do you condemn Republicans who believe that the election was stolen?
Yeah, he didn't really lose all those court cases. And most of the time, the cases could not even be heard because, fair enough, the judiciary just didn't want to deal with it. In some ways, it was a replay of Bush v. Gore, which occurred in 2000, when the courts, especially the Supreme Court, did everything they could to avoid deciding this case, a case that should have been, an election, rather, that should have been decided at first by the people and then potentially by the U.S. Congress, but nobody wanted it, so it was hot potato. And that's the sort of thing that happened in 2020. As for how the election, it was manifestly rigged. As for how the election was rigged, I don't know about all the dead voters and the illegal aliens. We are in Illinois, which is known for its dead voters since 1960, still going strong. But I don't know about those two mechanisms. But I can tell you one very clear way that the election was rigged, and that is that Pennsylvania illegally and unconstitutionally sent widespread mail-in ballots to its voters, in contravention of the state constitution. That would be just one example. The fact that on January 6th, the worst day in the history of this or any republic ever, on that day, Republicans in the Congress were following a 150-year-old precedent of trying to resolve disputed elections. And unfortunately, because of strange events that occurred, that was not able to take place. And of course, in the lead up to that election, we know how it was rigged because the libs shut down the whole country with the acquiescence, forced in many ways, of certain Republican leaders, up to and including the president. But they rigged the whole thing, and they changed all the voting rules, and they vastly expanded ballot harvesting, and the Republicans never had the chance or the capability to catch up. So was it rigged? Yeah. Does anybody, just show of hands in the room, does anybody seriously believe that, as the liberal media contend, that the 2020 election was the cleanest, most serious, least controversial election in American history? Does anyone believe that? One hand even? Okay, we got 1, 2, 3. There we go. You should be at the front of the line, by the way. We got 3 out of hundreds of people. So no. Now what the libs want to do, to me, the way that they give up the whole game is they keep saying, as you're saying, but they say it in suits and ties on television, they say, will you contend that the 2020 election was completely legitimate and absolutely kosher and nothing went wrong whatsoever? You say, why are you saying it like that, man? Like, why are you asking me about this so intensely? It's because I think their heated question is something of a confession. They changed the rules, they rigged the election, and they got away with it. And the challenge for conservatives is to make sure that they don't get away with it again. Simple as.
So it's actually refreshing to hear somebody like Michael Knowles come out and just have this overt opinion about the election. Because oftentimes what happens when you're trying to contend with leftist politics is that they will do what they can to slander anybody who talks about the things that they really don't want mentioned, and they'll call them all sorts of pejoratives. And then oftentimes you'll see conservatives take a step back and start walking on eggshells and get scared to talk about certain things. Some of these might include the trans issue. You get called transphobic. You get told that if you disagree with them, you don't want them to exist, and all of the rest. If you oppose the cultural or political implications of feminism, then you are a misogynist.
Did you just use a term that excludes women from an occupation?
Okay, let's back up.
Ah! Did you just say spokesman instead of spokesperson? When women are just as capable of selling sandwiches as anyone? Are you purposefully trying to use words that assert your male privilege? No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to frame you for raping Butters.
If you question the Jan 6 narrative, then you are a fascist who wants to destroy democracy. If you're loud and proud about your Christian values, then you are some sort of crazy religious zealot who wants to bring everybody back to the Dark Ages. So a lot of the times, what conservatives will actually do is acquiesce to this, and they will self-censor, and they will cede ideological ground to the left and try and appease them, even though that is a totally useless tactic, because the more you do that, the more that they just keep pushing forward and they just win. And I mean, there were clear signs of election fraud. You just got to watch Dinesh D'Souza's film 2000 Mules. They use all kinds of eyewitness testimony and forensic analysis to show how the Democrats genuinely seem to be guilty. And I think that Vivek Ramaswamy's take on this one was particularly on point when he says that the Hunter Biden laptop story alone was enough to implicate the Democrats in some form of election fraud, because suppressing that story, which we know they did through the Twitter files, and Mark Zuckerberg came out and literally said that the FBI called Facebook and told them to suppress the story. I mean, that alone is enough to at least warrant a further investigation. And also, we know that if that story was released to the public, it could well have cost the Democrats the election, because what is on that laptop, ladies and gentlemen, is spicy.
My first question when we speak to candidates right now, it's just sort of like a sanity check, which I think you will pass, honestly.
Let's hope.
Is there any way to interpret that Donald Trump actually won the 2020 election, or did he lose the 2020 election?
The way you're framing the question, you're asking me a very specific question. Is there any way? Here's one important unexplored strand.
Okay.
The Hunter Biden laptop story and its systematic suppression. I'm a data-driven guy.
Really?
I'm a data-driven guy, and I think you probably are too, based on
absolutely
what little I know. So look at the polling data on the aftermath and before and after. There are more than enough people, it's not even by a super small margin, that say they would have changed their vote had they been exposed to that information before that election. The fact is that was systematically suppressed in what was probably the single greatest form of election interference in American history.
And
there was a lot of
words,
discussion. If I may just finish, just to get the full freight of my view here.
Yeah.
There was a lot of discussion about the legitimacy of the 2016 election on the back of Russian election interference that actually, it turns out, was actually much smaller scale than surmised. But on the day of Trump's inauguration, there was a lot of discussion. Hillary Clinton called the election result illegitimate and said that it was partly the product of Russian election interference. Whatever that was, that pales in comparison,
really
to the effect of the systematic suppression on domestic soil of a story that 2 years later, every news outlet in this country has absolutely admitted was indeed true when it was systematically suppressed at the time.
Anyways, on to the next bit now, where Michael Knowles gets into a little bit of the way that liberal politics works. This is a very interesting one, and I'm going to expand on it in a bit.
Hi, Michael. Just in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm a lib.
Lovely to meet you, Mr. Lib.
I disagree with your position on abortion, but I respect your conviction. My question is about, it seems to me that you're making the assumption that Americans have moved left on a lot of these issues due to the presence of this liberal rhetoric. And I'm trying to understand what the evidence is for that. So I'm from California. I know very well lots of Californians were against gay marriage, but the public opinion really shifted. And even before the Supreme Court case, public opinion was very much in favor of allowing gay marriage.
But when did it shift?
Before the Supreme Court.
It did. You're right that it shifted before the Supreme Court case, which was 2015. But it shifted. If you just look at like Gallup polling or Pew, it shifted about 2012. And so where it shifted was not exactly with the Obergefell decision. It shifted with first Joe Biden and then Barack Obama endorsing gay marriage. So it was still from the top down. It was still part of a political operation. And then that set the stage for the change 3 years later. So I totally grant to you it's about more than just one court case. But I don't believe that this is some organic grassroots bubbling up from the culture that's then, leading politics. Quite the opposite. I think it was a top-down decision, a top-down campaign that they tried first in Massachusetts and they tried it in California. It didn't quite work in California. California. Finally, they had enough oomph after years and years for the President of the United States to push it, and then that gave Justice Anthony Kennedy the opportunity to write his ridiculous romantic poetry about how we have a right to intimacy in the Constitution, to which Antonin Scalia responded laughing and said, even if we did have this right to intimacy in the Constitution, surely marriage constricts rather than expands that, ask the nearest hippie. All of that happened as a consequence of political rhetoric, which I respect them for, and I wish conservatives would do it themselves.
Sure, but if that's true, then why hasn't opinion shifted towards being anti-abortion? Like, we've had 4 years of Trump. Why not just go all in and say, you know, let's ban abortion completely nationwide? Because, I mean, I would support that because I feel like that would help Joe Biden win, but I feel like you would support that too if your assumption is correct, that top-down opinion is sort of pushing America more than it is grassroots-based.
The problem is that the conservatives don't control the top institutions. So the libs, obviously during the Obama administration, they controlled the presidency. For a while, they controlled the House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court, is a little shaky because John Roberts is kind of a lib. And they controlled lots of governors' houses, and they controlled lots of state legislatures as well. But that's just the government. They also control Hollywood. They also control the news media. They also control the academy, certainly at the big universities, but also at most of the schools, high school, middle school, and elementary school. They control entertainment, as we've said. They control so much of the fabric of society. They control even the C-suites in a lot of big corporations. So they have an ability to mobilize public opinion for political effect that the conservatives don't. And so to your question, why doesn't Trump and why don't the Republicans just come out and say we want a nationwide abortion ban? Because they know it probably won't take very well. Since the Dobbs decision, there have been a number of major pro-life wins, important pro-life laws that have been passed, governors who ran on pro-life platforms, and new laws who ended up winning re-election. But it's much tougher for the conservatives, and we have to be a little bit crafty here. To say nothing of the fact that the Dobbs decision sends it back to the states. So even if a conservative did want to ban it at the national level and put aside questions of subsidiarity and federalism or anything like that, you'd actually run up against the conservative Supreme Court that would probably shoot you down for it. So we do need some gradual and incremental change. Here, I think this is where we can learn from the libs, which is that the libs have their big, revolutions. They're trying to push for radical political change, especially in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and even more than the libs, the socialists and the anarchists and the communists. And it just doesn't really work. So you have theorists like the Italian Antonio Gramsci, who's in the Marxist tradition, or later new leftists like Herbert Marcuse and others from the Frankfurt School, who come out and say, no, guys, we need to play a little bit of a longer game here. That, in fact, the teaching of the new left is then put into words by Rudi Dutschke, one of the leaders of the student movement, who says that we need a long march through the institutions. What Mao did in China, we have to have for America. And they succeeded very, very well. I mean, it took, almost 20 years between the debut of Will and Grace and the Obergefell decision that redefines marriage. So they're patient, they take a long time. And frankly, the artistry in Will and Grace was a lot better than Anthony Kennedy's stupid poetry. But they're patient and they're persistent. And so my fear is that conservatives are neither patient nor are we persistent, that we just kind of give up, we run scared, we cave on issues like marriage, to some degree on even transgenderism, which seems like a slam dunk for conservatives. Even on that issue, some have run away, and on the cause of life, when there's really no need to. We have won significantly on life if we can make sure that our rhetoric is not scary to people, if we can make sure that we don't overreach in ways that will be struck down by courts or that will undo some of the victories that we've already won. I think it's a winning political issue, and if we want to figure out how to push our ball down the field, we should look at our liberal opponents. They're very good at it.
Okay, so interesting take there by Michael Knowles, and I wanted to expand a little bit on what he's talking about when it comes to the way that leftist politics works. And honestly, this is something that conservatives could really take a leaf out of their book with. That is, of course, if you actually want to have power over institutions. He mentioned there Herbert Marcuse, who was a Frankfurt School philosopher who immigrated from Germany to America when Adolf Hitler took power and continued to work on critical theories with his colleagues. Critical theory is a strain of philosophy that seeks to undermine and deconstruct cultural and societal norms. This is supposedly meant to free people from the shackles of these norms. Things that have been established over thousands of years through trial and error, religion, philosophy, great empires and the likes. Screw all that, they say. These guys are going to deconstruct it all. Herbert Marcuse taught political theory at Columbia University and then Harvard University, where he and his colleagues gained a lot of traction and ripped through the academic world. So this strain of philosophy is in no small part responsible for much of what we see today in the education system, corporate bureaucracies, federal agencies, and the likes. And the long march through the institutions kind of makes sense when you understand the political philosophy of another man that Michael Knowles just mentioned by the name of Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist political philosopher who wrote during his time imprisoned in Mussolini's Italy about a concept that he called hegemony or cultural hegemony, which means that he views the relationship between state and society, or the governors and the governed, as a coercive hegemonic power where the ruling class impose their beliefs and their ways of life on to the ruled. And he claims that in order to gain political power, you have to take control of knowledge and decision-making institutions. Institutions that mold the thoughts and the perspectives of the populace.
Dozens of LGBTQ students and allies packing a Becker School Board meeting over a presentation they say is harmful to the community.
And what he called this position and what he advocated for, and what many of those who went after him also adopted, is what is called a war of position. This is a slow resistance to the state hegemony by creating many different countercultures. This with the aim to undermine and deconstruct the institutions. And the point of this is to weaken them so that eventually they can take control completely. So when I look around today at the cultural movements such as wokeism in corporations and schools, DEI in the highest levels of government and military, LGBTQ literally in the air we breathe. And even when I've been in Austin for the last week or so, I've been working at a cafe, and I reckon I've seen over the last 2 days 10 wokies that are either wearing a t-shirt with a pentagram on it or have it tattooed on them somewhere. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I can't help but to think that Gramsci and the people who came after him have been remarkably successful in what they were trying to do. And maybe the conservatives should think about doing something similar, because sometimes it feels like we are up here trying to create a dialogue, trying to talk with people, while they are down here just subverting everything. Maybe we need to come down. No, I think we're doing the right thing, but you know, food for thought. Anyway, next part, Michael Knowles is confronted by a very smug Brit.
Hello. So the original question I wanted to ask is that, in America, you have quite a lot of people kind of similar jobs to yourself, very strong conservative commentators going on Fox News, going on
very handsome,
YouTube
yeah,
channel.
yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Saying lots of things about, trolling the libs and transing kids and all of this kind of stuff. And, obviously this is a very lucrative profession. I mean, you get YouTube channels, you get put on Fox News, et cetera, et cetera. So, original question I wanted to ask is, with you being a former actor and all, do you actually believe any of the stuff you're saying? But after listening to your speech, which was very well made, if slightly insane.
Thank you very much.
I do actually believe what you say, so I'm not going to ask that. So the other question I'm going to ask.
I'm glad I persuaded you that I'm not just a total liar. I appreciate it. Yeah.
The other question I want to ask is, you said that federal Republican candidates, to avoid the backlash over abortion, should take the kind of ostrich position, head in sand, don't say anything, hope no one asks. But at some point, some Republican congressman or senator is going to introduce a national ban on abortion in the House or in the Senate. And so how can they exactly avoid taking the decision? So then you have to ask, well, if you really think abortion is murder, why shouldn't they all support a national ban, no exception, and send the woman who's guilty of murder who wants an abortion to jail? How are they going to avoid that question?
Those are two separate questions, and it's based on a premise that I suspect is not true. I think you give too much credit to Republican members of Congress and of the U.S. Senate. I think broadly they're much more cowardly than you make them out to be, and they probably will not want to touch that electric third rail, and they probably won't introduce a national ban, especially knowing that the leader of the party, who one hopes will be the president come January, would not support it. They just wouldn't have the votes for it. And then furthermore, knowing that the Supreme Court in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health explicitly stated that the issue was going to be sent back to the states. That was the court signaling, hey guys, don't pass this at the federal level, send it back to the states. So, of course, in principle, I think that a baby who lives in New Jersey is just as valuable and has just as much a right to life as a baby in Tennessee. But as a practical matter, I don't think it could happen, the federal ban, certainly not anytime soon. One of the other obstacles to a federal ban would be a deeply conservative principle, which is subsidiarity, which is built into our constitutional order through federalism. So they could just argue, as the Supreme Court is arguing, that this is not a matter for the federal government. Now, being told no has never stopped the federal government before, but in this case, it would probably be convenient for many of the politicians involved. So I could see them doing that. The only mild correction, I think, to your articulation of my position on it is I'm not arguing that they just put their head in the sand and try to duck. I think they need to make a statement. I think they have to have a platform. We're talking about the fundamental right from which all the other rights come. But I think the platform position ought to be, if it is to be moderated at all, it ought to be moderated in the scope of the jobs that they are seeking. So when a candidate for Senate, like our friend over in Arizona, is asked that question, our candidate for Senate says, I strongly support the right to life, I strongly support the correct decision of the Supreme Court in Dobbs, and I strongly support my fellow Arizonan conservatives who are going to make a great decision in defending life here. But at the federal level, that's just not my job. I will not have an opportunity to do that, and so I'm going to focus on the protections that I can focus on, but I'm going to focus on other issues as well. I think that's going to be pretty persuasive, because the issue of abortion, it's not even that it's 50-50. According to some polls, you could say it's 50-50 pro-life, pro-choice. It's even thornier than that. Individual people hold contradictory views on abortion. So you're not going to sort all of that out in an election season. And much as I love politicians, I'm really not knocking politicians, but a lot of them are not great at sorting out thorny bioethical and philosophical issues, certainly not on the stump. So I think just to look back at what has worked for conservatives thus far, the line on abortion hasn't really changed since Roe v. Wade. The Democrat line has changed. If you go back and look at the Ford and Carter debates over this, Ford and Carter held pretty much the same view on abortion. Ford wanted to go further and pass a constitutional amendment that would allow the states to decide. Carter did not favor that, but they both said we oppose abortion, and Carter never publicly defended Roe v. Wade until long after his presidency. Since that time, you've had, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, 2 Bushes, and a Trump, and their view has been, yeah, we don't defend Roe v. Wade, and we support life, and we support exceptions in certain cases, and we want to send the issue back to the states. That hasn't changed. It's worked pretty well. We've made a lot of gains on it. As the Democrats have ceded what I think is the normal ground here, and they're now pushing for abortion, passing bills to legalize abortion through the 9th month, or you have the Virginia Governor Ralph Northam saying that actually post-birth abortion is acceptable as well on that ridiculous radio interview. I think that poses an opportunity for conservatives if we're not going to be so afraid of our own shadow and cede ground that we don't need to cede.
Typical smug British leftist. I would absolutely guarantee you that he went to some sort of high-end Oxford school or something like that. I met plenty of these guys when I was actually living in London, and let's just say, not my kind of people, to say the least. Imagine coming up to ask a question to Smooth Mickey, one of the foremost political and cultural commentators in the United States. A guy that's obviously very intelligent, a man of faith, and actually a man of demonstrable character. And the first thing you say to him is, do you mean anything that you say? But as per usual, Smooth Mickey, so cool in these situations that honestly the Fonz would do well to sit back and take some notes. I think you could genuinely have Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer in the crowd asking Michael Knowles a question, and he would respond in the total same way. Anyways, he responded to that well, so on to the last clip now, where Michael is confronted about the Candace Owens situation.
Hi, 2 quick things. One, what is your opinion on the recent departure and statements of Candace Owens? And 2, as someone who is pre-med and hopes to become a physician, I know my own opinions on abortion, but do you think it's inherently immoral for a physician to follow his duty to fulfill a patient's needs, even if that includes an abortion?
I'll take the second question first, I guess. Yeah, I think it's a violation of the Hippocratic Oath for a physician to kill an innocent baby. So I know that there are laws in the states that not only permit this, but who knows, some health clinic might have a regulation that you as a doctor, if you work there, you have to perform an abortion. But I think that is profoundly immoral and contrary to the medical profession. As to my friend Candace, I've tried to stay out of it a little bit because these are very complex disputes between people who have had long-standing public debates and contractual obligations and yada yada yada. But it's no secret I'm very close friends with Candace Owens, very close friends with her husband. I'm the godfather to her daughter. So love Candace. I'm sure she is going to do great, and she's going to have a bigger voice than ever, and she's going to make $1 zillion, and she's going to continue to wield political influence. I'm not really worried about that. If I feared that Candace were going to be silenced or something like that, I would take some umbrage. But that is not going to happen. It's not possible to silence Candace Owens, and nobody wants to do that. Also, Jeremy Boring is one of my best friends of many years. I hate to admit it, even Ben is a very close friend of mine. And Caleb and the rest of the guys at Daily Wire. And they're really good guys, and they get a lot more flack than they deserve. And so that's basically my view. I don't think it would be charitable to, for a lot of people, these debates are just kind of images on a screen, or like you're rooting for the Yankees or the Red Sox. For me, these are very close friends of mine that have go back many years. And so I think the charitable and right thing to do to all of my friends here is basically to keep my trap shut on any, particulars here or there, other than to say, they're all big boys. They've all got, strong opinions, and I'm sure they're all going to do great, in the future. And I look forward to, many more opportunities, both not only privately, but even publicly, to, spend time with all of them and discuss things with all of them, and get all the kind of petty squabbling that goes on among partisans of both sides on the internet behind us. Because this is a risk in any media world, and especially on the right. Conservatives just love gossip, man. We like to portray ourselves as like Gary Cooper, the strong silent type. We're gossiping little teenage girls is what we are. And everyone loves, the latest spilt tea from this personality or that. And I just think it's very silly, especially for people who don't understand the nitty-gritty of these things. The reason that we have conservative media institutions, the reason that we have conservative activist institutions, the reason that we support certain candidates and hold rallies and change laws is because we have political goals that we want to affect in public life. And we can get distracted with all the latest tabloid drama, and I'm sure it'll be really interesting, and we can gab about it, over brunch. But we have a job to do. We're here to do something that is bigger than interpersonal squabbles, and it's bigger than personalities, and it's about the common good of the country, so that we can destroy the libs with facts and logic, and with ballots when we get to election day, and that we can do good and improve our country and make it great again.
So guys, I personally think that despite all of the controversy saying that if Michael Knowles was a true Christian, he would come out and he would defend Candace, and if he really believed in free speech, then he would have come out and defended her. I kind of disagree with that. I mean, maybe he could have done a little bit more, but at the end of the day, we don't know the ins and the outs of what happens behind the scenes there. He's obviously very good friends with Candace, and that maintains. He's obviously very good friends with the other guys as well. And when it's on a personal level for that and a professional level as well, it's hard to judge. So I honestly think that what he just said there is the right approach, and I could not blame him for it. He's a guy who is trying to and is doing a good job of impacting the culture in his own way. And he's definitely helping a lot of people with a religious, conservative message. I know he's definitely influenced me, and maybe he's influenced you guys as well. So anyways, hope you enjoyed that one, guys. If you'd like to find me below, you can find my links down there. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, of course, that's here. And if you'd like to watch another one, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.